The air in the Apex Command Spire's chrysalis chamber hummed with the silent, terrible energy of simulated war. 100 cadets from 24 species stood at their private command nodes, translucent hard light screens shimmering around them like captured ghosts, displaying the cosmic ballet of destruction. This was the final exercise of the Fleet Command Doctorate, a free-for-all war game in a meticulously crafted digital replica of the contested marches, a sector of space rich in resources and ripe for conflict. The goal was simple, brutal, and elegant. Be the last fleet standing. At the center of the room, on a raised dais, Prefectus Thuron of the Silic Concordance watched the maelstrom unfold on his master display. His long, six-fingered hands were clasped behind his back, his multifaceted eyes patiently absorbing the torrents of data. For 300 standard years, Thuron had taught strategy to the brightest military minds of the Galactic Compact. He had seen empires rise and fall in this very chamber, their fates decided by the logic, intuition, and arrogance of their young scions. His gaze drifted to two particular cadets. One was Princeps Xylos of the Vakari Dominion, his posture ramrod straight, his silver-scaled face set in a mask of supreme confidence. His command node was a whirlwind of decisive action. His fleets, modeled with perfect fidelity after the glorious golden armada of his people, moved with the geometric perfection of a master's theorem. They were an expression of Vakari philosophy, overwhelming force applied with precision and honor at the single most critical vector. He was, by every metric the Academy valued, a genius. He was winning. The other cadet was Kalen Vance. He was the sole human in the program, an anomaly from a species so new to the galactic stage they were still considered provisional members of the Compact. His homeworld, Earth, was a chaotic little planet filed under the designation Level 7 Death World, Post-Atomic, Prestellar Hegemony. Vance stood calmly before his own, much less active console. His expression was placid, almost serene, and he was losing. Badly. Observe Cadet Arthar, Xylos's voice, amplified by his node's comm system for the benefit of his vanquished opponents, boomed through the chamber. He had just shattered the main battle line of a Cathar hiveship. The human's fleets are scattered. He performs what his own history calls a Fabian strategy. A delay, a nuisance. It is the tactic of the weak, the desperate. Primitive, the master display, Thuron saw what Xylos meant. Vance's fleets, smaller and technologically inferior by the simulation's parameters, refused to engage in a decisive battle. They darted in, took minor losses to inflict even more minor damage on Xylos's supply convoys, and then vanished into nebulae or the gravity wells of barren moons. They were gnats, not warriors. He sacrifices entire frigate squadrons for no discernible gain, Xylos continued, his tone dripping with aristocratic disdain. He gestured at the display, where 3 of Vance's ships were immolated by a single lance strike from a Vakari dreadnought. A waste. He bleeds his strength for nothing. He has no concept of force concentration. From across the room, Vance gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A faint smile touched his lips, a fleeting expression that Thuron, with his enhanced vision, caught and catalogued. It was not the smile of a man resigned to defeat. It was the smile of a gardener who had just finished planting his seeds. Grand strategy is impressive, Princeps. Vance's voice came over the calm and even. Your formations are beautiful, laughed a series of sharp, dry clicks. Beauty and power are 2 sides of the same coin, human. A truth your grubby species has yet to learn. I will grant you a merciful end. Surrender your command nexus now, and your final score will not be so humiliating. You for the offer, Princeps, Vance replied politely. But I'd like to see how the scenario plays out. Thuron watched, his ancient mind processing the anomaly. Vance's losses were catastrophic by any standard metric. He had lost 62% of his fleet tonnage in the first 19 hours of the simulation. Xylos, by contrast, had lost a mere 4%. The simulation's victory predictor gave Vance a 0.03% chance of success. Yet he was not surrendering, he was not even flustered. He was watching, waiting. The decisive moment came at hour 23. Xylos, having finally cornered the bulk of Vance's remaining fleet in the Typhon Abyss, executed a flawless pincer movement. The golden armada of the simulation descended, plasma and kinetic rounds lighting up the void. Vance's command nexus, a heavily armed battle station, was the final piece to fall. Its reactor core went critical in a silent, brilliant flash of white light on the tactical display. A chime echoed through the chrysalis chamber. The simulation's automated adjudicator spoke, its voice a passionless monotone. Victor of military engagement, Princeps Xylos of the Vakari Dominion. Causal fleet destruction of opposing forces achieved. A wave of polite applause, a mix of clicks, chirps, and vibrations filled the room. Xylos raised his chin, basking in the glow of his triumph. He looked over at Vance's now dark console. The human was stretching as if waking from a long nap. A valiant, if misguided effort, human, Xylos projected, his voice magnanimous in victory. Congratulations, Princeps, Vance said, his voice sincere. It was a masterclass in fleet command. Prefectus Thuron's multifaceted eyes were narrowed. The simulation had declared a victor of the engagement, but it had not ended. The master clock was still running. The simulation space, the contested marches under Xylos's now uncontested control, was still live. The other cadets began to notice, their celebratory murmurs dying down into confused whispers. Prefectus, Xylos asked, his confidence wavering for the first time. Why has the exercise not concluded? The parameters of the exercise were to determine the ultimate victor of the contested marches, Princeps, Thuron replied, his voice soft yet carrying across the entire chamber. You have won the battle. The war, however, the war continues. Stared at his display, which had now shifted from a tactical fleet view to a strategic overview of the empire he had just conquered. His empire. The 73 star systems that Vance had controlled were now his. A banner flashed across the top of his screen. Imperial consolidation phase initiated, he scoffed. A formality, the enemy is annihilated. The population will be pacified and integrated. Standard procedure. Vance walked away from his dark console and stood near the back of the chamber, his hands in his pockets, watching the main viewer. He looked like a spectator at a sporting event, not a vanquished commander. The clock ticked on. Simulation hour, 24. Xylos's display lit up with a minor notification. A dockworkers' guild on the industrial world of Cygnus X1, a planet in the heart of the territory he'd just won, was protesting for increased caloric rations. A standard labor dispute. Xylos, eager to show his administrative prowess, diverted a small surplus of grain from his capital world's reserves. A simple, elegant solution, simulation hour, 31, a new report. The grain shipment diverted to Cygnus X1 had been unexpectedly delayed. A minor navigational error, the report stated. Simultaneously, a data file corruption was reported in the agricultural archives of the Viridian Rim, a cluster of a dozen agri-worlds Vance had held. The reported grain yields for the coming cycle were suddenly showing a 7% decrease. It was flagged as a probable sensor glitch, simulation hour, 38. The dockworker protest on Cygnus X1 had escalated into a full-blown strike. The delayed grain shipment had still not arrived. On the Viridian Rim, the sensor glitch was now being treated as a legitimate projection. Panic buying began in the urban centers. On Xylos's private comm channels, which were, of course, simulated, a few of his subordinate commanders began to grumble about the instability of the newly conquered territories. Xylos's scaled brow furrowed. He rerouted a priority shipment of foodstuffs, diverting it from one of his own core worlds. This was inefficient. It was messy. It was beneath him. On the other side of the room, Vance yawned, simulation hour, 46, disaster. A coded message, seemingly from Xylos's own command authority, had ordered the priority grain shipment to change course and reinforce a military garrison near a suspected pirate asteroid field. The message was a flawless forgery. The grain was now lost in deep space. On Cygnus X1, the strikes turned into riots. But it was the news from the Viridian Rim that was truly devastating. A piece of propaganda, expertly crafted, began to spread through their local information networks. It was a video, a deep fake, showing Xylos himself feasting at a lavish banquet while a voiceover, using a perfect imitation of a revered local leader. spoke of the Vakari elite hoarding food while the common people starved. The slogan was simple and devastating: "They drink stars while we eat dust." "This is absurd," Xylos snarled, his fingers flying across his console. "Find the source of this propaganda. Deploy the pacification fleet to the Viridian Rim. Put down the riots on Cygnus." Simulation Hour, 55. The pacification fleet, commanded by a Vakari admiral from a rival noble house, moved with deliberate slowness. Their orders were followed, but without zeal. They reported unexpected gravitic interference that slowed their advance. On Cygnus X1, the rioters had stormed the planetary administration building. They were not demanding food anymore. They were demanding independence. And on the Viridian Rim, 6 of the 12 agri-worlds had formed a coalition and formally seceded from his new empire, citing his tyrannical indifference. The propaganda was now everywhere. It had even appeared on some of Xylos's own core worlds, smuggled past firewalls that had been considered impenetrable. Prefectus Thuron watched the cascade. He looked back at Vance's initial moves in the simulation. Those frigate squadrons he had sacrificed. They hadn't been aimed at military targets. They had flown kamikaze runs into civilian communication relays, planetary data hubs, and interstellar network buoys. They weren't attacks. They were injections, viral uploads, sleeper code and logic bombs hidden inside what looked like stray missile fire. The damage they'd inflicted wasn't kinetic, it was informational. The false orders, the data corruption, the propaganda, Vance hadn't created them during the collapse. He had planted them all in the first 10 hours of the simulation, timed to activate long after his own military defeat. Simulation Hour, 67. Total systemic collapse. The secession of the Viridian Rim had created a famine in the core worlds that depended on their grain. The fleet admiral from the rival house, seeing Xylos's authority crumble, declared his loyalty to his own family's interests and blockaded Xylos's capital world, Xylos Prime, demanding the princeps abdicate for his gross incompetence. The propaganda had mutated. It no longer just painted Xylos as a glutton. It painted him as a foolish warmonger who had won a glorious battle against a non-existent threat, while the real enemies, hunger and division, destroyed his empire from within. His victory was now the very symbol of his failure. Simulation Hour, 73. The final report flashed on Xylos's screen, a blood-red banner of text. The Vakari dominion within the simulation has dissolved. Central authority is nil. Multiple factions vie for control. Widespread famine and civil war are projected for the next 5 cycles. Your command authority is no longer recognized. The simulation finally ended. The clock stopped. Silence descended upon the chrysalis chamber. It was a thick, heavy silence, full of shattered assumptions. Xylos stood trembling, his silver scales dull under the sterile light. He stared at the final screen, at the ruins of an empire that had been his for less than 3 standard days. "But I won," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. He turned, his eyes wide with disbelief, and looked first at Prefectus Thuron, then at Kalen Vance. "I defeated his fleets. I destroyed his nexus. I achieved the military objective." Prefectus Thuron slowly descended from the dais, his footsteps the only sound in the vast room. He walked past the stunned cadets until he stood beside Xylos, his gaze fixed on the final, damning report. "You won the engagement, Princeps," Thuron said, his voice a low, resonant murmur that seemed to shake the very air. "You executed a perfect battle, but in doing so, you handed your opponent the exact weapon he needed, your undivided attention." Thuron turned his head, his multifaceted eyes pinning Kalen Vance where he stood. The human met his gaze without flinching. "That," Thuron said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet heard by all, "was not strategy. That was infiltration doctrine." Before another word could be spoken, 2 figures in the severe, gray uniforms of the Academy's internal review board stepped out from a side entrance. They were Silic like Thuron, but they lacked his scholarly aura. They radiated a cold, clinical authority. "Cadet Kalen Vance," the lead officer stated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You will come with us." Standard post-exercise psychological debriefing, effective immediately. They didn't approach him aggressively, but their positioning was absolute. One stood slightly in front, the other flanking him, cutting off any path of retreat. Every cadet in the room understood. This was not standard procedure. This was an arrest, cloaked in bureaucratic language. Vance simply nodded, that same infuriatingly calm expression on his face. He glanced at the devastated Xylos, whose entire worldview had just been dismantled atom by atom. He glanced at Thuron, whose expression was one of profound, world-weary gravity. Then he turned and walked with the officers, leaving a silence in the room that was louder than any plasma explosion the simulation could have rendered. The great war game was over, but the true conflict, it seemed, had just begun. The debriefing room was not a room. It was a weapon. Every surface was a soft, non-reflective white, designed to eliminate shadows and prevent the eye from finding a resting point. The air was recycled with a faint, cloying scent of ozone and something vaguely floral, a chemical cocktail engineered to promote calmness while subtly heightening suggestibility. There was no table, only two chairs facing each other. They were made of a smart polymer that would, Cale knew, gently shift to be just slightly less comfortable over time. It was a place designed to psychologically unmake a person, piece by piece. Sitting in one chair was Kaylin Vance. In the other was a Silic he had never seen before. She was older than Thuron, her carapace a deeper shade of obsidian, her multifaceted eyes holding a diamond-hard clarity. A small, floating plate beside her identified her as Dr. Aris, chief of xenopsychological analysis. She was not a soldier. She was an inquisitor of the mind. "Cadet Vance," she began, her voice smoother than Thuron's, yet carrying an undercurrent of immense pressure. "Let's dispense with the formalities. Your performance in the chrysalis has triggered a Tier 1 security review. This is not a debriefing. It is an evaluation, to determine if your species constitutes a systemic threat." Cale remained silent, his hands resting on his knees. He had been expecting this. He had, in fact, counted on it. The objective of the simulation was clear, Aris continued, her tone clinical. The destruction or capitulation of enemy military forces. You ceded the military dimension entirely. Instead, you attacked the simulated society. You engineered famine, civil unrest, and political secession. Why? Cale took a slow breath, the chemically treated air feeling thick in his lungs. "With respect, Doctor, you misunderstand. I did not attack their society. I attacked their system. The Vakari, as exemplified by Princeps Xylos, view warfare as an equation of force. Ship versus ship, fleet versus fleet. It is clean, honorable, and for a species as powerful as theirs, it is almost always successful. Their system of war is an extension of their system of society, a rigid, top-down hierarchy that prizes strength and order above all else. System that has maintained peace and stability within their dominion for 1,000 of your years," Aris countered coolly. "A system that has never been properly tested," Cale replied. "An ecosystem with only one predator becomes complacent. The prey forget how to run. The predator forgets how to hunt anything but the slow and the obvious. Xylos looked at my fleets and saw prey. He didn't see the viruses my ships carried. He didn't see the sociological weak points I had spent months researching in your academy's own library." Aris's head tilted, a subtle gesture of intense focus. "Explain. What are these weak points?" "The Vakari sense of honor," Cale began, ticking the points off on his fingers. "It is their greatest strength and their most profound vulnerability. It meant Xylos would always seek a decisive, glorious battle. It gave me the time I needed to plant my seeds. It also meant that his subordinates, while loyal to the Dominion, held their own house honor paramount. The false flag message suggesting the Admiral's rival house was being favored was enough to make him hesitate. Hesitation in a crisis is a death sentence." He continued, his voice steady, almost academic. "Their centralized economy. The Viridian Rim supplied 60% of the core world's foodstuffs. A single, well-placed piece of propaganda suggesting the core was hoarding resources was enough to ignite secessionist sentiment that was already simmering beneath the surface. I didn't create the sentiment, Doctor. I just gave it a voice and a reason to act. Weaponized food," Aris stated, the words hanging in the sterile air like an accusation. "No," Cale corrected gently. "I weaponized the fear of hunger. A fear your advanced, stable galactic society has forgotten. Humans have not. We have millennia of intimate experience with it. Famine is not just a lack of food. It is a psychological weapon that dissolves trust, erodes authority, and turns neighbors into enemies. It is the ultimate catalyst for social collapse. And the propaganda, Aris pressed, the deepfake video, the slogans, they drink stars while we eat dust. It was remarkably potent, virulent. Kale allowed himself a small, sad smile. Human history is a museum of horrors, Doctor, but it is also the most effective military textbook ever written. We have started world wars with less. We have toppled governments with whispers and lies. We spent thousands of years fighting not other species, but ourselves. We weren't trying to outbuild each other with bigger ships. We were trying to outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast each other on a single, crowded planet. We didn't have the luxury of space. We perfected the art of breaking a society's will to fight because it was cheaper and more permanent than breaking their armies. Aris was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the faint hum of the air cycler. The comfortable chair felt a little stiffer now. In our threat assessment metrics, Aris said slowly, a predator species is defined by its physical attributes. Claws, fangs, superior strength, a biological imperative to hunt. Your species, by galactic standards, is physically unremarkable, yet what you describe, it is a form of predation. Precisely, Kale agreed. You've been looking for predators of the body. You never thought to look for predators of the mind, predators of systems. A Vakari dreadnought can obliterate a city in seconds. It is a terrifying power, but it is a visible power. It can be fought, countered, defended against. But how do you defend against an idea? How do you build a shield against doubt? How do you shoot down a lie that confirms your deepest fears? He leaned forward, his calm demeanor finally cracking to reveal the intensity beneath. Xylos thought he was fighting a fleet of ships. He was wrong. He was fighting the collective trauma of 10,000 years of human warfare. He was fighting Machiavelli and Sun Tzu. He was fighting the ghosts of genocides, the echoes of manufactured famines, the blueprints of revolutions that we perfected long before we ever learned to split the atom. He brought a sword to a battle of the mind, and he lost before the first shot was ever fired. Eris stared at him, her multifaceted eyes unable to process the totality of his confession. It was outside her experience, outside all established models of interstellar conflict. The compact had laws against orbital bombardment, against biological agents, against stellar destruction. But they had no laws against weaponizing culture. They had no laws against weaponizing hope or despair. What you have done, Cadet, Aris said, her professional composure finally breaking, a tremor in her voice, is demonstrate a capacity for a type of warfare we have never conceived of. Total, systemic, psychological. You did not just defeat your opponent, you unmade his reality. Showed him that his reality was a fragile construct, Kale countered. And that is the true human advantage, Doctor. We know how fragile everything is. We've broken our own world and rebuilt it a dozen times. We know the fault lines in every society because we have lived in them. You see us as newcomers, as primitives just reaching for the stars. You are mistaken. We are the oldest warriors in this galaxy. We have been fighting the longest and the hardest. We just fought ourselves. The weight of his words settled in the room. Aris looked at this young man, this representative of a primitive species, and for the first time she felt a sliver of genuine, primal fear. The galaxy was full of species that could build mighty fleets and wield incredible energies. But here was a species that could wield belief, a species that understood that an empire was not just ships and planets, but a story people told themselves. And the most dangerous predator of all is the one that can change the story. This evaluation is over, Aris said abruptly, standing. Her own chair had become impossibly uncomfortable. You will be confined to your quarters until the Academy Council and the Compact's Security Directorate have reviewed my report. Will your report say, Doctor? Kale asked, his voice quiet again. Aris paused at the door, her back to him. It will say that we have categorized humanity incorrectly. We classified you as prey. We were wrong. The question is, if you are not prey and you are not the kind of predator we understand, then what are you? She left without waiting for an answer. Kalen Vance sat alone in the sterile white room, a faint, knowing smile on his face. He had won the simulation. He had passed the evaluation. He had successfully delivered his species' opening statement to the galaxy. It was a simple, terrifying message, delivered not with warships but with a whisper, "We are here, and we know how things break."